Once upon a time, there was a Virgo who believed someone, and that is the whole tragedy of it right there, compressed into a single sentence. Not that you were naive, not that you were desperate or careless or willing to settle for less than you deserved, but that you believed someone who was very, very good at being believed. Someone who had studied the architecture of what people like you most need to hear, and who had delivered it with the specific precision of someone who had done this before, and who knew exactly which parts to emphasize and which details to make feel incidental, and how long to sustain the performance before the cracks began to show. You are one of the most analytically gifted signs in the entire zodiac. Your capacity for reading what is actually happening beneath what is being presented is genuinely exceptional. And this person found the specific seam in that capacity and exploited it, not accidentally, with intention. Because the seam in Virgo's perception is not a weakness in the general analytical capacity. It is a very specific vulnerability that comes from your commitment to fairness, from your refusal to reach a conclusion before the evidence is airtight, from your deep and genuine resistance to judging someone harshly before you have accounted for every possible mitigating factor. They gave you mitigating factors, a lot of them, specifically chosen, carefully timed, just enough of them to keep the conclusion perpetually just out of reach while the situation continued to unfold. They understood that your mind would not rest until it had a complete picture, and they kept the picture deliberately incomplete in the places that mattered most, offering you enough to work with to keep the analysis active and never quite enough to let it arrive at something definitive. That is not your failure. That is a very sophisticated manipulation of one of your greatest qualities. I want to walk you through what the cards confirmed about all of this, because I think you deserve to understand not just what happened, but the full architecture of how it was constructed. Not so you can revisit the pain of it, but so you can see it clearly enough that you never mistake this particular construction for the real thing again. Let me describe what I felt the moment I opened this energy, because the initial impressions were immediate and specific, and they arrived before I had touched a single card. I felt the residue of something that presented as warmth, but that left a specific kind of cold when it departed, not the cold of ordinary loss, which has a quality of absence. This had a quality of substitution, as though the thing you thought was real was revealed to be a placeholder for something real that was never actually there. And the cold is not the cold of losing something, but the colder cold of discovering that what you were holding was not what it appeared to be. I also felt something about you specifically that I want to name before we go any further. I felt your intelligence intact, your discernment intact, your capacity to see clearly and to know what you are looking at intact. What happened did not break any of those things, even though it may have temporarily shaken your confidence in them. The instrument is not damaged. The instrument was operated on by someone who specifically knew how to get around its defenses, which is a different thing entirely. And understanding that difference is part of what this reading is meant to give you. The first card in this reading arrived in the position representing what this person actually was, the full, honest picture of who was presenting themselves as something else. And I want to describe it with specific attention, because I think you deserve to have the reality named plainly rather than gently. This card shows a figure moving through the dark with a quality of smug satisfaction, carrying what they have obtained through means that bypassed honesty, with an expression that carries awareness of what they have done and absence of genuine remorse about it. This is the card of someone who has taken something through strategy rather than through merit, who has operated in the domain of the mind and of language and of the deliberate management of another person's perception to achieve an outcome they would not have achieved through honest engagement. What this card tells me about who this person actually is beneath the Prince Charming presentation is something I want to name carefully and specifically. This is not someone who wanted you and expressed it imperfectly. This is not someone who had genuine feelings and also had genuine limitations, and whose combination of both produced a situation that hurt you. This is someone who identified what you would respond to and manufactured it. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. The first is a flawed person navigating genuine feeling. The second is a performance with an audience. I also want to speak to the sword suit this card belongs to, because the suit of the mind is doing significant work here. The intelligence of what was done was not incidental. The construction of a false presentation requires real cognitive effort, real attentiveness to what the other person is responding to, real skill in managing information. What this person brought to this situation was a particular kind of intelligence, but it was pointed in a direction that had nothing to do with your genuine well-being. The second card arrived in the position representing what the performance specifically consisted of, what Prince Charming actually looked like when they were wearing the costume. And I want to describe this carefully because I think identifying its specific elements is useful for recognizing this particular architecture. If you encounter its, like again, this card shows a young figure in the early stages of their suit, holding a cup, the quality of someone who presents as emotionally open, romantically available, full of feeling, and ready to offer it. This is a card that, in its genuine expression, describes someone who is genuinely led by feeling, genuinely available for emotional connection, genuinely in the early stages of something real. But what I am reading in this position is its performance rather than its genuine form. The mimicry of all of those things by someone who understood that these specific qualities were what you would most respond to. I am sensing that what the Prince Charming presentation specifically contained was an unusual quality of emotional attentiveness. They appeared to listen in the way that people rarely listen. They appeared to see you in the specific way you most want to be seen. They offered a version of themselves that seemed unusually safe, unusually honest about their own vulnerability, unusually willing to be genuine in ways that most people guard more carefully. And the specific reason this particular approach was effective with you is that it mimicked the qualities that are most genuinely rare in the world, the qualities you have perhaps spent a long time hoping to encounter and that you recognized with something that felt like relief when they appeared. What was being mimicked was something real. The emotion, the attentiveness, the apparent willingness to be seen and to see. Those qualities exist in the world and are genuinely valuable and will genuinely be available to you from someone who actually has them. What this person did was create a high quality imitation of those qualities, specifically because they are what you were most hoping to find. Does this feel like it is describing something specific, Virgo? The particular quality of what this person presented and why it was specifically calibrated to work on someone like you? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear what you are recognizing as I name these things. The third card arrived in the position representing how the gap between the performance and the reality began to become visible, what actually happened when the costume started to slip. And I want to describe this precisely because I think it holds something important for how you understand what your perception was actually doing throughout this experience. This card shows a figure who has been sleeping, finally waking into the morning light with the quality of someone who has been in a particular state and is now emerging from it into a clarity that was not available while they were inside it. This card belongs to the suit of the mind, but in its rested form, the mind after it has processed, rather than in the exhausting intensity of trying to figure something out that has been deliberately made difficult to figure out. What I am reading in this card is something I want to say carefully and specifically. Your perception was working the entire time. It never stopped working. The discomfort you felt at certain moments, the specific times when something did not quite add up, but you could not yet identify what was missing, the particular quality of unease that arrived in certain interactions and then seemed to dissolve before you could fully examine it, all of that was your perception accurately registering the gap between the performance and the reality. The accuracy was never in question. What this person was doing was specifically designed to make it difficult to act on accurate perception by ensuring that the gap never stayed visible long enough to provide airtight evidence. The clarity that eventually arrived was not the result of your perception failing and then recovering. It was the result of the performance eventually requiring more maintenance than the performer was capable of providing indefinitely. Every performance has a limit. Every costume eventually shows its seams. What you experienced was not your perception being slow. It was the inevitable arrival of the moment where the gap became too large to be managed. Inhale with me, Virgo. Because the fourth card is the one I want to give the most space to, and it contains something I think this reading has been building toward. This card shows a figure in complete stillness, in the specific posture of voluntary withdrawal into the interior, surrounded by the quietness that belongs to someone who has chosen, deliberately and wisely, to stop and look within rather than continuing to engage with circumstances that are not providing the clarity they need. The sword suit governs the mind, and the stillness depicted here is the productive stillness of a mind that has stopped trying to resolve something from the outside and has turned inward to let the resolution arrive from the inside. What I am sensing this card is describing for where you are right now is something I want to name without softening. There is a period of necessary integration that comes after an experience like this one. Not a period of grief exactly, though grief is part of it. A period of the specific internal work of adjusting your model of reality to incorporate the full truth of what this experience was, rather than the partial, still somewhat protected version that tends to persist when a mind that has been managed is in the early stages of releasing the management. Part of that integration is the uncomfortable revision of certain memories, the moment that seemed like genuine connection that you can now see differently, the conversation that felt like real intimacy that you can now recognize the architecture of, the specific way certain things were said that you initially received as vulnerability and that you can now see were calculated disclosure. That revision is not pleasant. It is, however, genuinely useful because what comes out of it is a considerably more accurate understanding of what real looks like compared to its imitation in a way that nothing short of direct experience with the imitation would have produced. You are not going to be fooled by this particular construction again. Not because you are now closed or guarded or have decided not to trust, but because you have seen this specific thing clearly enough to recognize it. And that recognition is something you will carry forward silently and permanently into every subsequent encounter. I want to speak to something about the specific impact this experience tends to have on Virgo, because I think naming it honestly is more useful than offering comfort that lands too lightly on what was genuinely real. Virgo trusts slowly and carefully. You do not extend the quality of genuine engagement that you extended to this person casually or frequently. When you do extend it, it is because you have done the assessment, considered the evidence, and reached a conclusion that the extension is warranted. What this experience has done at some level is compromise the confidence you have in that assessment process, not because the process was wrong, but because it was operated on by someone who specifically knew how to circumvent it. The compromise of confidence in a process you have spent a lifetime refining and relying on is a specific kind of blow that does not heal the way ordinary hurt heals. It takes longer. It requires more evidence accumulated over time through subsequent experiences that the process is still reliable even after having been manipulated. I want to name this clearly because I think it is real and because I think you may be underestimating its actual impact on you, which is something Virgo tends to do with its own wounds, treating them as intellectual problems to be understood and then filed away rather than as injuries that require actual, sustained, patient tending. Be patient with this. The instrument is not broken, it is recovering. And recovery does not happen on the analytical timeline your mind prefers to work on. I also want to say something about the particular cruelty of what was done to Virgo specifically, because I think naming it clearly is part of what allows you to set it down without carrying it as though it reflects something about your capability rather than something about theirs. The Virgo capacity for fairness, for holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, for refusing to reach a conclusion before the evidence is complete, is one of the rarest and most genuinely admirable qualities that a person can have. It is part of what makes you trustworthy, part of what makes you a good friend and a good partner and a good judge of situations. What this person did was take that quality and use its structure against you. The same patience that makes you thorough rather than reactive made you susceptible to a strategy specifically built around patience. The same fairness that makes you trustworthy gave every manufactured piece of mitigating evidence its moment of equal consideration. The same refusal to jump to conclusions gave the performance more time than it deserved to continue operating. None of those qualities should be abandoned or diminished as a result of this experience. They are too genuinely valuable to you and to the people in your life who have always benefited from them to be sacrificed on the altar of this one encounter with someone who knew how to get around them temporarily. What you are developing and what this experience is in the process of giving you, whether you wanted it or not, is not a lesser version of those qualities, but a more specifically calibrated version of them, one that includes the additional data of having seen this particular pattern clearly enough to recognize it. The fifth card arrived in the position of what becomes genuinely available on the other side of this experience, what is actually there once the integration completes. And I want to deliver it with the full weight it carries because it is something real rather than something consoling. This card shows a figure standing at the summit of something, wand raised, the full, open, unobstructed brightness of a blazing sun behind them, the quality of someone who has arrived at a genuine high point after genuine difficulty and who is now operating in the specific embodied fullness of that arrival. The fire element of this suit is the energy of things finally moving in their natural direction without constraint or obstruction, of passion and creative force and genuine forward momentum allowed to operate at their full capacity. What I am sensing this card is describing for you in practical terms is something I want to be specific about. What this experience ultimately produces, once it has been fully processed and integrated, is a very precise and very personal knowledge of exactly what you are willing to accept and exactly what you are not. That has the specific hard-edged clarity that only comes from having experienced what the wrong thing actually feels like in your body rather than only in theory. You do not know what you will not tolerate until you have tolerated it once and recognized what it cost you. You have that knowledge now. You have it in this specific, experiential, cellular form that cannot be taught and that cannot be acquired any other way. And what it produces in terms of what you call forward, what you allow into your life, what you are willing to engage with, what you recognize immediately, and what you let pass without hesitation is the specific kind of discernment that is the direct and exclusive inheritance of having been through something like this and having come through it with your essential self intact. Your essential self is intact. The intelligence that was operated on is returning to full function. And the version of you that walks forward from this experience is more precisely calibrated to the real thing than any version of you that has not yet encountered its high quality imitation. Before I close, I want to say something directly about the question that I suspect has been sitting at the back of your mind throughout this reading. The question of how someone with your particular quality of perception did not see this sooner. The answer is the one I offered at the beginning, and it is still the most accurate one. This was not a failure of your perception. This was a performance specifically calibrated to your perceptual strengths and built around your particular commitment to fairness. The person who did this was not smarter than you. They were specifically practiced at making this specific kind of situation legible as something else to this specific kind of person. Those are not the same thing. You are not naive. You are not a bad judge of character. You are someone who encountered a very deliberate construction and who, with your characteristic thoroughness, gave it every benefit of every available doubt before reaching the conclusion that the doubt was no longer available. The Prince Charming they performed was a costume. The person who believed in it was genuine. And genuineness encountered by something that only performs genuineness will be deceived temporarily until reality provides enough data to resolve the picture. Reality provided the data. The picture is now resolved. What you deserve is the real version, not of Prince Charming, which was always a construction designed to capture something rather than to offer it. But of the actual thing, the person who shows up as themselves, because being themselves is what they are doing rather than what they are performing, who has real warmth because they are actually warm rather than because warmth is useful, who sees you because you are interesting rather than because you are useful to be seen. That person exists, and everything you have learned from this experience makes you better equipped to recognize them when they arrive. If this reading named something you have been sitting with, the specific experience of having been shown a Prince Charming who turned out to be something else entirely, please share it with a Virgo who might need to hear that being deceived once by a sophisticated performance is not a permanent verdict on their judgment. And leave a comment. I want to hear what this is bringing up for you and how you are sitting with it. I read every single comment, and I hold everything shared in this space with genuine care long after this video ends. until next time, Virgo. The costume was convincing. The person wearing it was not, you are not who you were before you knew the difference. That knowledge belongs to you now. Use it well.